Day, my friends, where it would have been a public offense to wear a mask. And now it's a public offense to not wear a mask. Oh, how the times have changed. And for those of you that think I'm just joking to start up our podcast tonight, I'm not. I've actually been arrested for wearing a mask in public in my youth. You actually legally cannot conceal your identity in public, and certainly not from an officer of the law, which me and some friends did on a regular basis. Anyway, masked or unmasked, welcome once more to the Plaid Avenger channel. Here on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook for what is our experimental long-form podcasting over the course of 1 week. One international topic broken up into 4, perhaps 5 separate podcasts. Because these are big issues. These are worldly issues. These are things that are not easily explained in a 30-second news snippet, nor even a 10-minute podcast by some newscaster. So I am a professor of geography and world regions and of wine at Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies, here in Blacksburg, Virginia. And I've lectured about these things for very long periods of time, over many moons, many decades at this point. So I'm trying to pick complicated topics and then break them down into more manageable bites. Yesterday, and the theme for this week is Turkey ticking off the world. Everybody hates Turkey, except at Thanksgiving. And this is part 2, regional rivalries and the Kurdish Conundrum. For those of us that joined last night, thank you all for your patience hanging out with a over-the-hill Plaid Avenger type old man spouting on the YouTubes and the interwebs for so long. I'll try to keep it brief for tonight. Not doing so well so far. But last night we talked about the history of the modern state of Turkey and its place in the greater/wider Middle East and the world, and how through its history it has come to already be ticking off certain local actors because of territorial fights, namely the Greeks, namely the Armenians. I mentioned briefly on my way out the Kurds. And so I wanted to follow up with that today and say, hey, by the way, in order to understand the modern world and everybody that is currently frustrated by the great state of Turkey, we should step back, look at the whole region. And I do want to follow up on that Kurd thing, because the Kurdish issue plays into not just domestic politics for Turkey, but it plays into international politics. And it plays into not one, but 2 different international conflicts that the Turks now find themselves in. That's right. Some group called the Kurds is responsible for another group called the Turks being involved in international conflict. So that's something you probably haven't thought about or heard of or even know about, quite frankly. So let's start talking about those things now. When I was starting to talk about Turkey, and I always do this and I will continue to do this, I always like to start any talk by kind of painting the picture, especially the regional picture, because we in America, all humans are guilty of this, but we in America are especially guilty of this, that we're like, Asia, that's Chinese people, and the Middle East, that's Arab people, and Latin America, I don't even know anymore. Are they Hispanic? Are they Latino? Are they Latinx? None of us know. However, those are gross oversimplifications, overgeneralizations, and when it comes to the Middle East, even though we're talking specifically about Turkey, you really can't understand anything about what's really going on in the Middle East without painting the background picture. So once more, I'm putting up the ignorance alert here on this map and saying, hey, by the way, we're talking about Turkey, and Turkey is full of people who are ethnically Turkish. That's easy enough. You got that. But most folks think of the Middle East and they say, oh, well, everybody's Arab. And that is correct in a sense, but it's not really correct, because there are lots and lots and lots of Arab people in lots and lots and lots of countries that are named things that you've not thought of as Arab. So Saudi Arabia, you got that. But Morocco, Libya, Egypt, lots of people, lots of Americans like, no, Egypt has Egyptian people in it. Okay. Egyptian is the name of a nationality. That is, you're the member of this nation state called Egypt. But that's not an ethnicity. And so Arab ethnicity dominates the Middle East in many countries. Jordan is Arab people. Egypt is Arab people. Libya, Arab people. Northern part of Sudan, Arab people. So that's the kind of ethnicity that most people associate with all the Middle East. But there's these others. I've already pointed out Turkey is Turkic-based people, a different ethnicity, a different language group. More importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, but just to point out things, the Persians, that's modern day state of Iran. They are not Arab people. And so I wanted to start tonight's talk with saying, hey, guess what? Based on ethnicities and language and religion, there are regional rivalries across the Middle East that Turkey is a part of the game, and they are constantly and a lot lately frustrating all the other players in the great game of Stratego being played, or Risk. Remember Risk? The great game of Risk or Stratego being played across the greater Middle East. Turkey is one of the main players. It is not the only one. And everything Turkey does frustrates other players. And by the way, I'm not picking on Turkey. Everything Iran does frustrates the other players. Everything the Team Arab does frustrates the other players. So I felt like we should step back and say, hey, who are these other players that help define what's going on in the Middle East and help us understand current conflicts, especially the ones that I'm talking about this week, the ones based on what Turkey's up to. Well, before I even get to that, I just said, well, we form up teams based on ethnicities and languages and religion. And so one other component that I did not touch upon at all yesterday that will really help you understand regional rivalries within the greater Middle East is religion. And so let's just give a nod to some religious context next/now. And that is, when we think of the Middle East, that is, we all outsiders think of the Middle East, we think, oh, they are all Muslim folks. Everyone in the Middle East, from Morocco all the way up to perhaps Central Asia, are Islamic followers of Islam, Islamic folks, Muslims. And by and large, that is a decent and correct generalization. There, of course, are some exceptions. The state of Israel is Jewish. However, what I want to point out to you very quickly is, what kind of Islam are those people in which places? Because there is a major sect, not really a division, it's two different camps of the Islam religion. And it's not causing regional conflict or interstate conflict, but it helps define the teams that usually face off in conflict and interstate conflict. That will make more sense in a moment. So just to revisit a couple slides here about Islam. Its core expansion, the religion was related to the Prophet Muhammad in Mecca and Medina, its holiest cities. I think it was originally Medina, went to Mecca, back and forth. It's the two holiest cities of Islam. It is currently, those two holiest cities of Islam are located in the modern state of Saudi Arabia. And so this is all kind of holy ground, this whole area. However, what you see here is that once the religion was revealed and the religion started taking hold and proponents of the religion wanted other people to have that religion, it spread, as all things do, as all good ideas do, it spreads. Sometimes just because it's a good idea, sometimes by force, sometimes by conquering. And so what we had early on, and this is in the 600s AD, what you had is an expansion of what I call the Arab Islamic Empire from that core area in what's now Saudi Arabia out to encompass all of the classic Middle East and eventually all of North Africa, even over to Spain and Portugal, and up into what's now modern-day Turkey, Iran, and all the way into Central Asia. Because this Arab Islamic Empire had a good idea, its religion, but it also had a very good structure as a full-on old-school empire with a great political system, a well-functioning bureaucracy, and a really good army. So it pushed both religious and political boundaries as its empire grew. And as I've suggested now, all the way from the Iberian Peninsula, North Africa, all the way into perhaps now Central Asia. Now, that empire ebbed and flowed, as all empires do, and it went away. I talked about this yesterday. It was actually Genghis Khan, 1258, that kind of crashed the golden age of Islam. However, the Ottoman Turks then pick up the mantle. Most of the wider Middle East and beyond stays Islamic. Just because the Arab Islamic Empire goes away doesn't mean people just convert religion to something else. So everybody in this area kind of stays Islamic. And the Ottoman Empire, Turkish-based Ottoman Empire, is also an Islamic empire in a sense, in that it perpetuated the religion. But we've already talked enough about empires coming and going. I wanted you to understand just this one little thing about religion. So all of this area, I shouldn't say all, the vast majority of this area is indeed followers of Islam. What type, though? And there are two major divisions, again, not divisions, two different sects of Islam, Sunni and Shia. And Sunni is the main one, all right? And by the way, I should go back. The dark green areas are the Shia religion, the Shia followers. The lighter green areas are the Sunni followers. As you can see from the map already, Sunni is the overwhelming, most populous sect of Islam. Like 90% of people who are Islamic are of the Sunni variety. And I'm sure somebody's going to ask me, and by the way, the chat room's open, so anybody can ask me questions. I can actually see it here in Twitch, and Katie will tell me if there's any questions that come in from other places. Before anybody asks me what's the big division between Sunni and Shia, it's not that much. It's barely worthy of mentioning, but I want to allay your worries or your questions. It was simply a matter of when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be with him, when the Prophet Muhammad passed away, there was no clear-cut person to take charge after he departed this planet. And so the real division between Sunni and Shia in Islam is what camp people decided to follow after the Prophet Muhammad died. And some people said, hey, it should be a family member, because most things in human history are passed down by family. You think of monarchy, you think of political power, you think of economic power, it's passed down in your family. So a lot of people said, well, it should be a relation of Muhammad should be the person we follow. Other people said, no, this is a big empire. We have a bureaucracy. It should be one of his generals or his second in command or his right-hand man or whoever the guy was at the time. That, in essence, is the difference between Sunni and Shia. One group said we're going to follow a person who worked with Muhammad closely, and the other group said we were going to follow a family member of Muhammad. The Sunni division is the group that said, we're just going to follow his second in command, his main general. That's the dude who's in charge. That's who's going to carry on the religion and the empire. That's Sunni. Shia is, we're going to follow a family member. I believe it was a cousin of Muhammad's called Ali. I'm not an Islamic scholar, by the way, but I just want you to understand it's no great difference between the two sects. It simply was who you chose to follow. And this is going on 1,300 years ago. But, history's history. Religion's religion, and it plays out to the modern day. And that's what I'm trying to get at. How does it play out to the modern day? Well, because Islam became a worldwide phenomenon, not just a Saudi Arabian one, not just a Middle Eastern one, but it became a worldwide religion. In fact, it's the second biggest religion after Christianity. And that's only if you, in terms of adherence, and that's only if you count all the different sects of Christianity as a singular whole. It just edges out all the followers of Islam, and if you consider Sunni and Shia together. So over 1 billion adherents to Islam worldwide, and it is worldwide. It does cover virtually all of North Africa, all the way down the east coast of Africa, all of the current Middle East, Turkey, into parts of Eastern Europe, into all of Central Asia, into modern-day India, Pakistan, into Southeast Asia. In fact, the world's most populous Muslim country is Indonesia. It's not even in the Middle East. In fact, what's the second most populous Islamic country? Is that Saudi Arabia? No, that would be India. Okay, what's the third most? I think that's Pakistan. Okay, what's the fourth most populous Muslim country? I think that's Bangladesh. The vast majority, I wouldn't say the vast majority, but the majority of followers of Islam are not in the Middle East anymore. They are scattered across all of Asia and Africa. So Islam born in Saudi Arabia divides into two sects. becomes a worldwide phenomenon that we all recognize today. But again, the point I'm making here is to understand modern day Turkey's issues within just the Middle East region. What kind of Muslim are we talking about? What kind of Islam? And as I already suggested, Sunni is the vast majority. 90% of the over billion followers of Islam are of the Sunni variety. Only about 10% Shia. But this map is showing you, boy, you can really look at some concentrations here. And do focus on this for a minute, because if you look just kind of casually, you might start to pick up that, hey, this one little factor, whether you're a Sunni or a Shia, I can look at this map and see that there's some differences within the Middle East that might be related to some conflicts within the Middle East. And I might be able to make this a little more clear for you. Iran, while the worldwide followers of Islam, 90% Sunni, 10% Shia. In Iran, it's flipped. In Iran, where most of the followers of Shia are, it's 90% Shia and only 10% Sunni. So Iran is kind of the core of this one sect, but it's not alone. Iraq has significant numbers. In fact, a majority of Muslims in neighboring Iraq are of the Shia variety. And again, for those of you that know a little bit of history, have followed the multiple wars that the United States has conducted in Iraq, you might have known that why is it there's always this tension between what the U.S. does in Iraq to try to help liberate them, and then Iran's getting involved. This explains part of that. There is a natural religious affiliation between Iran and Iraq and some other places in the neighborhood, by the way. And in fact, it's become known as the Shia world, or the Shia crescent of influence that Iran wields, based solely on this religious affiliation. Remember, Iran is Persian. They're not Arab. They're not Turkish. So when you see that Iran is influencing political events, or influencing a war, or influencing neighboring countries, it's because of this one cultural factor that Iran, feels like that they are the leader, the natural leader and perpetuator of Shia Islam across the wider Muslim world. And I do love to point this out. This was a phrase coined by the Arab leader of Jordan, the king of Jordan, Abdullah II, coined this phrase a few decades ago, and it's really taken hold for us outsiders to understand some of the tension within the Middle East based just on this. So a lot of countries don't like Iran, and we'll get to that in a minute. And Iran is this central player, okay, the cheerleader for Shia Islam. And Iran does a lot to try to influence or protect or take care of or fund money to or fund guns to other Shia players across the Middle East, because they're the vast minority. Got it? So the Shia crescent was coined by the king of Jordan, saying, hey, look, Iran their nefarious influences is permeating all the other places in the Middle East that have significant Shia populations. And you can draw it in this kind of crescent moon where Iran's the center of it. A lot of Shias in Iraq, a lot of Shias in Azerbaijan. That's been in the news lately, hasn't it? Yeah, it's in the news right now because they're in a fight with Armenia. But there's also Shias in Syria. Not a lot, but the leadership of Syria, that's the guy shown right there, the President al-Assad, he is Shia. Most of his country is Sunni, but the leadership of Syria is Shia, and that makes all the difference of what's going on there. But all the way down in Yemen, there's currently a civil war in Yemen that's basically based on different sects of people. Now, again, are they fighting in Yemen to decide what part of the religion is best? No. This division, this different sects of Islam, it's not really that people are fighting about religion. It just helps you identify the teams. The Shias kind of stick together and the Sunnis kind of stick together. They're not fighting about religion, but by and large, it helps define the teams. Does that make sense? Am I going too fast here, getting too crazy? So a civil war in Yemen that Iran is funneling money and guns to the Shias there. And Saudi Arabia, a Sunni-dominated state, is funneling money and guns to the other side. That's just Yemen, and we're not even talking about Yemen today. Weird, you're going to talk about Turkey, but this is the background of what's going on when we start talking about these major power players across the greater Middle East and who likes who and who fights against who. Just one more word about the Syrian civil war, because we're going to get to this in like 10 more hours in this talk tonight. I'm going to start with this and end with this. Just based on what I've told you so far, I've only talked about one freaking thing. I've only talked about different sects of Islam. And this little chart is trying to show you or help you understand who's fighting in the Syrian civil war. And is that still going on? Yeah, it's been like a decade. And are there more than several Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people involved in this fight, including Turkey. So I wanted to start with Shia and Sunni division and bring in Syria, because we're going to start here and end here. This is how convoluted a lot of the regional rivalries are. So Syria's been in a civil war for almost a decade now. Who knows how many hundreds of thousands dead, literally over 1 million refugees fleeing. And who you would think a civil war, that means Group A is fighting Group B and vice versa. No, not in the Middle East, my friends. There's never just two people in the fight. There's many. So if you look at this chart, what are you seeing already that maybe you're starting to figure out based on what I've just talked about for the first 10 minutes of this podcast? It seems like in the upper right, upper left corner, you have all the Shia people. Iran leaders that's the centerpiece of Shia Islam. And I already told you that the Assad family, the rulers of Syria, are Shia, so Iran's propping them up. Hezbollah is a Shia-based group that Iran also funnels. It's over in Lebanon, by the way, that fights against Israel. All of these folks, or they're in Syria too, all of these folks are on that same team. Russia just happens to be on the team. It's got nothing to do with being Shia. That's a different story altogether. But let's pull back into Turkey here. Okay, so Turkey's fighting against Syria because they're Shia? No, not really. But Turkey is Sunni. All the Arab states, mostly Sunni. I've already mentioned Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. They're all Sunni. And actually all the rest of them are Arab, besides Erdogan, who's Turkish. And then there's rebels that were fighting to overthrow the Shia-dominated government of Syria. And you see the United States is right there in the middle with a split screen of Obama and current President Trump. And there's also these other players. Kurds are in another corner, and ISIS is in another corner. All of these people, all of these entities, all these groups are fighting against each other in the Syrian civil war, and some of them still are. And believe it or not, we're going to get to all that starting right now. So, if you thought that little chart was convoluted, by the end you're going to understand it all. You already get perhaps the Sunni Shia divisions of the teams. Okay? Let's go back and now pick back up the ethnicity just a bit and tie that in with the Sunni versus Shia schism. Okay? So if you want to understand why people are ticked off, why entities are ticked off at Turkey right now within the Middle East, and who's Turkey's allied with and who's Turkey's pissing off, you do have to step back and say, okay, who are the main players who are always vying for control across the greater Middle East? Team 1, and these are just teams that I made up. They're not in sequential order of importance or even size or military power or popularity. You just got to start somewhere. So I say Team 1 is the Arabs. Now, again, we're back to ethnicity. The Arabs that are overwhelmingly followers of Sunni Islam. And the only thing I want you to know for right this second is that the Saudis and the Egyptians are kind of the power core. The Saudis are the power core because they're the one of the richest countries because of oil, but also because they protect the holy sites of Islam. Egypt is a power player because it's an ancient civilization. It's been around forever, and it's a huge population, a huge, highly populated, highly educated population. So these are the kind of core Arab power players, but they're not alone. And now I'm just going to show you maps that you've already seen, because this was talking about the growth of Islam, but it also helps you understand how did Arab ethnic folks get to all other parts of the Middle East. Because if you went back in time 2,000 years ago, there were not Arab people in Algeria. There were not Arab people in Libya. There were not Arab people in Oman. Actually, I take that back. They weren't Oman. They weren't Arab people in Sudan. So how did this work? Well, as I suggested, The religion, a very important world religion, started in an ethnically Arab-dominated place that we now call Saudi Arabia. And as that empire grew around that religion and expanded out to the rest of the Middle East, they took the religion, but they also took the humans. So it's an Arab-based empire that its population and its ethnicity and its language and its religion spread out with it to all these other parts of the Middle East, which is why when we think of the Middle East, we usually think, oh, it's mostly Arab people because they dominate the Middle East. And that's true, again, for these very reasons. However, that empire is now long since gone for 700 years. And what's the remnants of that empire? The remnants are what we call the Arab League, something we've talked about in other lectures, may talk about again before we even get through this Turkish lecture. And that is the modern day states of the Middle East. And all the ones lit up in green here are members of this entity called the Arab League because their populations are overwhelmingly of Arab descent, of Arab ethnicity, speak Arab languages. And they kind of partnered together to work on Arab problems. This is back in the 50s and 60s, I believe, is when the Arab League started up. It's not been a terribly successful organization on the world stage. I'm just highlighting it for you so you understand, oh, Arab ethnicity does dominate the Middle East for reasons that you now understand. And there's a bunch of Arab peoples you probably know. Everybody from Saddam Hussein, now dead. Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, also now dead. But all the leaders of Egypt, there's King Abdullah of Jordan there, popped up in center square. All of the kings of Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden was a Saudi nationalist himself. These are all Arab people that you know. And by the way, the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, he's Arab too. Again, I know it gets tricky for Americans because you're like, no, it's Jordanians live in Jordan and Syrians live in Syria. That's a nationality. That's not an ethnicity. They're mostly, overwhelmingly, Arab ethnicity. All these guys that have popped up on the screen are ethnically Arab. They're just live in nation states that identify themselves under different names now of Jordan and Syria and Oman and Yemen. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Here we go. And by the way, you're probably going to know the next stories I'm getting to. There's Donald Trump with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He's not necessarily the true guy in power, that Crown Prince, but everybody knows he's the one in charge. He's going to be the king soon, and everybody loves this dude. At least the United States does. And that's some of the headlines I wanted to get to you. You probably know this already, that the United States has long been an ally of most of the Arab world, especially Saudi Arabia, and to a lesser extent, Egypt, again, the core, and has sold weapons to all these folks for a very long time. And that was the $60 billion deal. And this one was under former President Barack Obama. And then Donald Trump, not to be outdone, just already did another $8 trillion, whatever it is, Saudi arms sales. And for those that followed the podcast I did a couple weeks ago about several other Arab states recognizing the state of Israel, namely the UAE and who was the other one? Was it Bahrain? The United States is also probably has some secretive, huge arms deals going down with those countries too as incentive for them to have recognized Israel. So United States, long an ally of Saudi Arabia. Just some other headlines I have up here from the last decade to start to get you thinking about the regional rivalries here. Saudi Arabian troops enter Bahrain to help put down unrest. Saudi Arabia is kind of the most powerful military economic core of the classic Arabian Peninsula, and all the other smaller states around it, or I won't say sub-states, that would offend them, but kind of have to toe the line of what Saudi Arabia wants to do and how things play out in that part of the world. However, there are other entities that are just as powerful and who also hold sway, who are still in the Arab world, namely the UAE and Egypt, have been quite militarily active lately doing things. And in all the cases of all these stories I just outlined that happened in the last 10 years, both the Saudis putting down some unrest, some Shia unrest in Bahrain, and the UAE and Egypt helping put down some Libyan militants. These stories are bizarrely related because one of the things that Team Arab really does not like is politicization of Islam. And that seems weird because all of the states in the Arab world are very Islamic. And all of them have populations that are almost 100% Islamic. So why would I suggest that the Arab states, the leadership of Arab states, is very troubled by Islam in politics? Because isn't that a conundrum? Isn't that a catch-22? Isn't by default all the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt, aren't they Islamic people and therefore they're Islamic politicians? No. The Arab world, by and large, are monarchies and or dictatorships. That is not an Islamic state. Make sure you understand the difference. An Islamic state is one in which Islam is the foundational principle of the government. It is the foundational principle of the justice system. People who are in charge of Islamic countries or Islamic republics, they themselves, the president, the prime ministers, whoever they are, they're Islamic people. They are studiers of Islam. They're not career politicians, and they're not kings. So of course, we're never going to get to the end of this presentation, but I do want you to understand, above all other things when it comes to the Arab world, they do not like radical Islam. They do not like the idea of Islam becoming, any of their politics being overthrown by Islamic politics. And that's important to understand who hates who in this part of the world. Let me go ahead and get to it more quickly now that I'm already taking too much time. The second major team that I'm going to gloss over because we've already talked about them all day yesterday, we're going to talk about them for the rest of this lecture, is the Turks. The Turks are not Arab. They're ethnically Turk. They are also Sunni, so they do share that with the vast majority of their Arab brothers and sisters. And they are secular. So I was just hinting that most Arab states are also secular, believe it or not, kind of, but they're monarchies. So it's a royal family. It's not Islamic people in charge. It's a royal family in charge who happens to be Islamic. And that's a critical difference that I'm going to keep reinforcing. But with the Turks, you already know about this because I showed you this slide yesterday. And if you're joining us for the first time, you could go watch the hour and a half we did yesterday. But we're going to talk more about Turkey in a little bit. But they are a secular state that's overwhelmingly Islamic, overwhelmingly Sunni, that has been looking to be part of the Western world for a while, but now is leaning away from that, which is what's pissing off a lot of folks, okay? And that's part of this podcast. Here's the team I really wanted you to understand, though. I should have put this second right behind Team Arab. So Team 3 is the Persians. And this gets real easy because while there are ethnically Arab people in 20 or 22 or 25 states in today's world, the Persians are all pretty much in one state, and that's Iran. And now you already know that I've kind of been highlighting, and Iran is the crucible of Shia Islam. So the other sect, which is only 10% worldwide, 90% of Iran is Shia. So it is a very different state. Ethnically, they're not Turks, they're not Arab, they're Persians. They have a long history that's separate from all those other entities, by the way, and they're very different because they're the Shia core. Now, first off, Iran equals Persia. Old school Persia equals modern day Iran. I've already pointed out this map. Ethnically, they're quite different. And unlike some other places, this part of the world was one of the first empires. The Persians were the first dominant ethnic group across all of the Middle East, and in fact dominated all the way into modern day Turkey and modern day Greece and modern day Egypt. Under, of course, Xerxes, a great king who built the empire, or he didn't build it himself, but he was one of the bigger kings that you might have seen depicted in the 300, one of the most wildly accurate films about the Persian Empire ever, said no one ever, as depicted in the 300. And so that, and we're talking 2,500 years ago, those folks dominated. The Persians dominated the Middle East. The Arab groups that existed in the Middle East when Persia was on top of everything, the Arab groups were small populations, nomadic people in the Arabian desert of no great consequence to a giant empire, bureaucratic dynamo like the Persian Empire 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. I'm telling you that history because the Persians are a proud people, and the Persians have every right to say, hey, we were the first major kingdom in this area, the first major empire, and the first major culture that's maintained its own cultural identity for longer than anybody else. And that's an argument that can be made. When the Persian Empire ruled across this part of the planet, there weren't even any Turkish people in the Middle East yet. They didn't arrive for 1,000, 1,500 years later. So Iran is important to understand because it's very culturally distinct, historically distinct, ethnically distinct, linguistically distinct, and yes, even religiously distinct in terms of it is the purveyor, the main center of Shia Islam. Now, Iran, this is not a lecture about Iran, so I'll go quickly through this. Iran is what I call a top 20 country. It's the 18th biggest country per size. It's in the top 20 world population. Its GDP is really big, but you never hear about them because everybody hates them. Sorry. I know the podcast is about Turkey pissing everybody off, but Iran has been pissing everybody off for a very good long time. Let's say since 1979. Your country, if you're living in the United States, has had virtually no diplomatic relationships with Iran since 1979. That's how pissed off the United States is at Iran. Okay, well, why is that? Again, this merits a whole separate lecture. But 1979 is a crucial, pivotal year. And not just because it's when they had this thing called the Iranian Revolution, which they overthrew a monarchy. Hint, hint, think about the Arab monarchies I just mentioned earlier. The Iranians overthrew a monarchy and made their country into an Islamic republic. And Iran is your best example of a true theocracy in today's world, where the religion is the ruling party of the state. And that's exceptionally different than every other ruling, governing party in the Middle East. This is why so many other states in the Middle East hate Iran, because Iran says, hey, we are devout followers of Islam. Don't even bother with the Shia part. Iranians say, or at least the Iranian leadership since 1979 has said, hey, look, the Middle East is almost all Muslim people. We are the only country that's smart enough to understand that Islam is so important, it should dominate the political system, and the country itself and its governing and its judicial systems and everything should be based on Islam, period. And that's what they did. They overthrew a monarchy and they implemented this system. This system, by the way, scares the sweet bejesus out of all of these other states in the Middle East because they don't want to be overthrown. And Iran regularly touts that when they make fun of other Arab states in particular, when they say, look, you guys are supposedly good followers of Islam, but you have a monarch in charge. Who the hell put that guy in charge? It wasn't Allah. And you're all corrupt, and you don't stand up to Israel, a Jewish state, and you don't do this. And Iran is the only, I'm speaking as if I'm the state of Iran, by the way. I'm not saying this as personal viewpoints. Iran says, hey, we are the only true great country that follows Islam properly because we have made it the central organizational principle of our state. And all the other Arab states are a joke, and they're not pure, and they're all corrupt. This is part and parcel of why there's so much animosity between Iran and especially the other Arab states. Turkey sometimes, but the other Arab states in Iran are at loggerheads virtually all the time. Again, just to refresh if you joined us late, we're talking about major regional rivalries across the Middle East and how that's playing into Turkey's attitude of what's going on in the Middle East right now. So, the Islamic Republic of Iran is despised by virtually all Arab leaders and considered to be the number one threat to their very existence. Israel, by the way, should add in, routinely says Iran is the existential threat to them, period. So Israel doesn't like Iran. Arab leaders don't like Iran because it threatens their ruling systems and the way they live. And almost all Arabs hate Iran, except this one dude. And there's one dude, and I don't expect you to know who this dude is because he's dead. But back in the day, when the Islamic Revolution happened in 1979, this old dude here in the corner used to lead a country called Syria. And he supported Iran because he is a Shia. See where I'm going with this? That's the father of the current president of Syria, al-Assad. And here he is. They're both here in the middle. So you have Team Arab. The biggest divisions of the biggest power plays and regional rivalries across the Middle East are between the Arab states, overwhelmingly Sunni, overwhelmingly monarchs and or dictatorships, and Team Shia, or Team Iran, or Team Persia, whatever you want to call it. Team Persia has allies like the Assads of Syria. Even though they're Arab, they're Shia. And if you learn nothing else and are tuning out, hopefully you already understand a little bit more about what the hell's going on with that the whole civil war happening in Syria and why certain groups support them and why other groups fight against them. So it could be argued that, and it is argued by a lot of Arab states, that they're seeing a re-rise of the Iranian Empire, a re-rise of the Persian Empire through their use of Shia Islam as a galvanizing agent of why they support other entities across the Middle East to fight against Arab monarchies, or even to perhaps promote other countries to have a revolution and become Islamic states like them. So that's why you have so much angst and animosity between the Arab states and particularly Iran, because of this Shia crescent concept. Okay, but I'm supposed to be talking about Turkey, so let's get back there. The other major entity to consider as a regional player in all this, of course, is Israel, a non-Islamic place altogether. I call them Team Hebrew. They are Israel is 100% Jewish. I shouldn't say that. It's overwhelmingly Jewish. There are some Palestinian Muslims who live there. They may not be accorded the same rights as Israeli Jews, but they do live there nonetheless. Team Hebrew is very Western looking. It has the United States and most of Europe as allies. So it's almost an outsider, even though it's in the middle of the region in terms of its alliances and who it likes and who it hates and all that other stuff. So, quick hatred guide to the region. Team 1, the Arabs. They hate Iran. I hope I've made that clear. And they, by the way, they hate Assad, the president of Syria, because he likes Iran. Yeah, is this starting to make sense already? I hope so. I hope I'm not yelling too loud. So the Arabs hate the Team Iran, and they do not like Assad because he's also Shia and aligned with Iran. They are leery of the Turks. So the Turks used to dominate all of the Middle East when they were in control of the Ottoman Empire. And Turkey is reasserting itself in today's world, the focus of our podcast for this whole week. And this is starting to also trouble the other Arab states who are like, oh, okay, what's Turkey doing? They're not threatening to overtake us, but they are projecting power outward when other Arab states are not. And we're mostly worried about Iran projecting power outward. So what's going on with Turkey? Okay, so you got that so far? Team 2, the Turks. They hate this group called the Kurds. I haven't even got to yet. And they hate Assad. They hate the leader of Syria too. The Turks have no real qualm with Team Arab, but they do not like Assad. It's mostly a neighborhood thing. Team 3, the Persians. They hate everyone. They don't like most of the Arab states. They really don't like Israel. They are vocal about hating everybody, and most of these entities are pretty vocal about hating them right back. However, the caveat here that I'm throwing in with Turkey is Turkey has had an on-again, off-again, okay relationship with Israel. So Israel, right this second, by the way, it's off. Turkey and Israel are in a pretty decent spat and not really getting along. But it's not an existential threat. Israel does not see Turkey as a huge threat, not a threat of invasion, not an existential threat. They mostly look at Iran as the existential threat, and they're leery of most of the Arab states, although, you know, that's changing, okay? So the Persians hate everyone, and by and large, most of them are hated right back. Turkey and Iran, by the way, get along sometimes, and not right now. So again, We're talking about, everybody's pissed at Turkey. Yeah, all the entities so far I'm talking about, not real happy with what Turkey's been up to. And about now to Team Israel. Team Israel really hates Iran. They also really hate Assad because he's aligned with Iran. And quite leery of everyone else. Although that's the thing that's changing, is now a couple of Arab states have recognized Team Israel. And one might have asked at some point in the last month, if you've been following international news, why did these Arab states suddenly recognize Israel? And one of the answers is listed on this little hate cheat sheet for you. And that is that the Arabs and Team Israel have kind of come to a gentleman's agreement that they both hate Iran much more than they hate each other. So this is, again, looking at the greater regional rivalries. This explains a lot of things that are happening in today's world. And I'll throw in some non-regional rivalries that feed into the regional rivalries. And that is that the United States and Team West in general, that would be the EU and Europe and the main players, they really like Israel. They are typically allied with Israel. Typically, the United States has been typically allied with the Arab states, and typically a strong ally of Turkey, although we're talking about how that's changing right now. Russia has been a fan of Iran for a while. Not a fan. Allied with Iran. Sticks up for Iran, mostly because Russia knows it pisses everybody else off. So Russia's alliances usually fall with Iran. They're okay with Israel, but I wouldn't say they're tight. Russia's okay with many of the Arab states, but they've never been tight. And Turkey, actually, I don't even know how to define it, because Russia and Turkey have had many wars with each other historically and have gone back and forth trading blows and killing each other's armies over territorial squabbles in the last 200 years. Right this second, it's on again, off again between Team Turk and the Russians as well. This is just a little cheat sheet. If anybody's interested, by the way, if anybody's interested in this whole presentation, I'll send it to you. Just hit us up and we'll post it somewhere. But I love this cheat sheet of hate guide to the greater Middle East. So everybody's listed twice, and then you follow the columns down to see who likes who and who hates who. It's very helpful. I carry this in my wallet. Okay, but back to the point. Russia, like I said, Russia generally allies with Iran, okay with Israel, okay with most Arab states. Cyclical with the Turks, especially on foreign policy. And now we're getting back to Turkey. Turkey's moves as of late have been agitating Russia in a very big way. Namely, the whole situation of any foreign interludes that Turkey has been getting involved in typically piss off the Russians. And we're speaking mostly of Syria here. So both Russia and Syria are involved, both Russia and Turkey are involved in the Syrian civil war. And indeed, back in, I want to say 2015 or 2016, the Turks shot down a Russian jet. This was a big deal. So while I have pictures of the Russians and Vladimir Putin and Recep Erdogan shaking hands here, they are cordial. They have worked together, but that can turn on a dime, is the point I'm trying to make. So when the Russian jet got shot down, that was cause for concern that maybe this is going to blow up into a full international war. And just recently, and by recently I mean in the last couple weeks, tensions between Turkey and Russia are flaring again, as Turkey's getting ready to send in a whole bunch more troops to this little place called Idlib that's just across the border in Syria. What's that all about? I don't know. We should get to it. How the heck are the Russians and the Turks rubbing elbows and increasing friction in Syria? What the hell? How are these two countries in another country and perhaps pissing each other off? Well, this may be a whole nother podcast that maybe we'll wait for tomorrow to get to, is what is going on with Syria and how did all these entities get involved and how are the Turks pissing off a lot of people? Because they now control about a 20-mile strip within Syria, a 20-mile strip from their border for defensive purposes, perhaps offensive, but they're saying defensive purposes. Okay, well, why is that? How is Turkey controlling parts of Syria now that's causing friction with Russia, who's supporting the Syrian government? Well, because we actually need to step back one more time to this map to look at one group that we totally missed. Oh, that's right. I said this podcast was about regional rivalries and the Kurdish Conundrum. And I got about 50 more slides to go, but I think I can do it in 10 minutes because this is not as complicated as one might see or might think from the outside, because you don't even need to know a ton of history. I just want you to know that there's this group of people in the Middle East. Back on this map, they're in the kind of brown, sludgy area that crosses a whole bunch of international lines, and they're called the Kurds. It's a different ethnic group. And the Kurds, and this lit up here on this map, is the Kurdish inhabited area. It's a separate culture. It's a separate group of humans that have been hanging out in this area for, I don't know, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, mostly in the mountainous areas, split between a whole bunch of different states now. The Kurds are in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, in Armenia. So this is a nation of people without a state. Nations without states. Kurds is always your best example of that. And they're a nation that perhaps has always wanted to have a state. And they thought when the Ottoman Empire collapsed back in 1919 after the end of World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was dismembered, many Western powers told them, oh, you know what, by the way, you should get your state now. Because you're separate, you're not Turkish. All the Arabs got their states after the Ottoman Empire was disintegrated. And, this Kurdish group, they should get their state. And then, psych! No, they didn't. They got split up amongst all these other Arab and Turkish states that you see on that map there. And this has been a cause of consternation since the modern state of Turkey has been around. 1923, if you remember from the slideshow yesterday, is when the modern state of Turkey took shape. The remnant group of Turks left over from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire formed up their own state called Turkey, home of the Turks. However, there was this big group of people named the Kurds who were hanging out there up in the mountains. Again, they're in other countries too, but the Kurds may represent 20% of the overall population of Turkey. That's in the modern world. This is now. This is in history. 1/5 of your population of Turkey is not Turkish. They're Kurds, and they are separate, and they're a minority, that hasn't always been treated as equal citizens of modern Turkey and has at times been attacked and sidelined and been a peripheral part of the Turkish economy and the Turkish political system. However, Turkey has been, try to be balanced and fair here, over the last 100 years. And by the way, Turkey's going to be celebrating its 100th year anniversary here in another 3 years, 1923, it will soon be 2023. So for most of the last 100 years, different administrations have tried to reach out to the Kurds, have tried to incorporate them more. They have invested money in roads and infrastructure in Kurdistan. And by the way, Kurdistan, you see kind of lit up in the dark green area here. Most of the Kurds in Turkey are in the southeastern quadrant. It is an undeveloped, it's mountainous. It's kind of like Appalachia. Boom. I just put 2 and 2 together there. Kurdistan is kind of like Appalachia is in America. And I'm not making fun of people in Appalachia. I love Appalachia, but it routinely is, we think of it as coal country and kind of small towns in the mountains and depressed populations, not as urban, not as metropolitan, not as developed. And that's what you have in southeastern Turkey with the Kurds, these mountainous areas, not as developed, a little bit behind the times, not really part of the action of what's going on in the rest of the country. So in this circumstance, there has arisen resistance to not having their own state and resistance to being part of the Turkish state, which some of the Kurds think that they're not very welcome in or don't have a fair shake in or not treated equally in. So over time, and this is now back to 1974, we're in modern times, but a group called the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, started up. Very quickly labeled as a terrorist organization by Turkey itself. And it is a group that started with the intentions on maybe having greater equality or greater political voice within Turkey, but quickly also had a sideline of, and we want to perhaps fight for a separate state of Kurdistan and carve out this part of Turkey and make it our own state, which we were promised at the end of the Ottoman Empire anyway. Now, I'm trying to present a balanced approach here. The Turkish state says the PKK is a terrorist group, and they have plenty of documented attacks to prove it. The PKK over time, and again, it started in 74, fighting began in the 80s, and intensified in the 90s, and there are long lists that the Turkish government will supply to you of every attack. Many civilian attacks, by the way. That's why they're labeled as a terrorist a group by most other parts of the planet, by the way, including the United States. So it's a organization that has used terror, that has picked civilian targets, that has blown up buses, that has blown up government buildings, and it's a source of great friction within Turkey, because at the same time there are liberal people in Turkey who are like, no, we need to help it. Yes, the PKK is a terrorist group. We shouldn't work with them. We should fight against them, but we should do more to incorporate the rest of the Kurdish people so they don't go down a radicalized path. Now, that's the roots of the PKK, and by and large, it was really hot and heavy in the 80s and 90s, but coming into talks of getting into the EU, Turkey was kind of berated by the EU and its American allies as well, saying, hey, look, you guys need to stop persecuting the Kurds so much. You need to step that back a little bit. If you want to be considered as part of Team West, you need to have better human rights, which means they need to be incorporated as full citizens and given all the qualities of regular citizens. Even though Turkey at the time is saying, hey, look, dudes, they're blowing stuff up. What do you want us to do? And everybody in the West is like, you're right, but you try to work it all out. And in light of that, they did try to work out these things with the Kurds. They did, like I said, they did build infrastructure, they did do things, and they actually caught the creator and main leader, Abdullah Öcalan of the PKK. They caught him in 1999, and he's been in jail in Turkey ever since. Oh, no, I take that back. By the way, you should know this. The PKK for a long time operated out of Syria. That's interesting. Boyer, weren't you going to talk about Syria? I am. So the PKK, this radical Kurdish group, was located and operated out of Syria. Part of the angst of why Turkey didn't get along with the Syrian leadership, because the Syrian leadership allowed the PKK to operate out of there. The PKK also operated out of northern Iraq, where a whole bunch of other Kurdish people are. Those are points to keep in mind as we get to today. Because while the issue was settling out in the late 90s and into the 2000s, and it looked like that human rights were being observed and Turkey was going to get into the EU, that all kind of fell apart because of this thing called the Iraq War, which happened right next door to Turkey, that started up in 2003. And I'm not going to get into all the nuances of that. That's a whole nother 2-hour lecture. But the chaos of the Iraq War from 2003 to 2011, which disintegrated the central leadership and the bureaucracy of the state of Iraq under this crazy guy named Saddam Hussein, a dictator. But the thing about dictators is they keep everybody in line under their iron boot. So we don't like dictators. Personally, I hate dictators. But when you remove a dictator, you have to understand that all hell's going to break loose, because all the folks who were unhappy under that dictator are now going to try to do whatever the hell they want, including groups like the Kurds. And we're back to the Kurd story. The Kurds in northern Iraq, which were well organized and well organized militarily once the Iraq Civil War started to break out, they were able to kind of hold on to their little territory and strengthen their position. And yes, the PKK was operating out of northern Iraq as well. And now you perhaps understand why Turkey has actually invaded northern Iraq several times, including during the Iraq War, which really pissed off the United States. And in fact, Turkey was very unhappy with the United States for all of this time, because Turkey's saying, hey, look, dudes, you're giving money to these Kurds. You're giving money to these radical Kurds up in northern Iraq. And we count them as terrorist groups because they've been blowing stuff up in Turkey this whole time. And the United States, for its part, I will defend the United States, as most international world watchers will. The United States is saying, hey, look, dudes, we understand you have an issue with the Kurds. We understand you have an issue with a particular group of Kurds called the PKK, a terrorist group. We get it. we recognize them as terrorists. However, all Kurds are not part of the PKK. And in fact, most of the Kurds in northern Iraq were part of the Peshmerga. It was a serious military fighting force, and the United States was funneling money and guns to these Kurds to help overthrow Saddam Hussein. And they're still kind of funneling money and guns to some of the Kurds to help stabilize and provide more stability within Iraq. So I do want you to get this right from the get-go. The United States and Turkey have been long-time allies, and they're both NATO partners. And there's U.S. military bases in Turkey that helped with the U.S. invasion of Iraq both times. However, this has been a sticking point between the United States and Turkey, and it's getting worse. Turkey's been getting more angry about this because it says, look, you're helping funnel money and guns to terrorists who are attacking Turkey. In the United States, and here's my defense of the United States, you have to understand that there's different groups here. Not all Kurds are part of the PKK. Not all Kurds are radicalized. Not all Kurds are trying to blow up Turkey. Many Kurds would like to have their own Kurdistan, but not even all Kurds are fighting for a separate Kurdistan. And the YPG is the People's Protection Units, which is part of the Syrian Kurdish Democratic Union Party, which was running northern Iraq, Kurdistan in northern Iraq. And the YPGs were very successful military units to help repel not only Saddam's forces, but then in the middle of all this chaos, this other group called ISIS crept in. Does anybody remember ISIS? This radicalized nutbag, insane clown posse of a religious group that was then trying to take over Iraq or destabilize everything. And actually the YPG, the Kurds, have been the most successful at fighting back against ISIS. And not just in Iraq, but next door in Syria. Oh, we should get there now, shouldn't we? So let me throw you through a few news stories of the last 10 years. Again, we're talking about the friction between Turkey and Kurds, but also Turkey and outside players. March 2008, Turkey actually invaded northern Iraq during the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which did not make the United States happy at all. And Turkey's going in saying, hey, you're fighting a war in Iraq, but we're going to go blow up a bunch of PKK bases. In fact, we're going to move military troops in, and they did, much to the chagrin of the United States. The U.S. was like, dudes, there's already a war here. We're trying to stabilize this area. In fact, northern Iraq is the most stable part of Iraq. Can you not blow up shit there? And Turkey's like, nah, we're going to do it. And that wasn't the last time. June 2012, Turkey military hits Kurdish targets within Iraq. June 2020, and hey, that's now. Turkey hammers Kurdish rebel targets in Iraq. We're still talking about Iraq. Iraq's not even at war anymore, I guess technically. Turkey shifts fight against Kurdish militants deeper into Iraq. Here's a little known fact. Turkey has full-time military presence in northern Iraq. Turkey has a full-time military base or two in northern Iraq. Why? To fight radical PKK elements in northern Iraq, in Kurdistan. And by the way, side note, Turkey is quite terrified of northern Kurdistan or northern Iraq becoming a separate Kurdistan under any definition. Iraq is still quite destabilized. Iraq could completely fall apart, and if it does, the most stable and ready to rule itself place is actually Kurdistan in the north. And Turkey does not want that. Why? Why? Because Turkey hates the PKK. And Turkey thinks if Kurdistan separates itself from Iraq, it's going to cause way more turbulence, way more turmoil. It's going to be a whole nother civil war, and it will create a separate Kurdistan that will then harbor more terrorists who will then go attack Turkey. So Turkey is against Kurds getting a state of any kind, anywhere, at any time, which of course pisses off lots of Kurds in lots of different places. Even now in August, we're talking about 30 days ago, Turkey says operation against PKK in Iraq will continue. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks, Iraq was furious because Turkey sent over a drone strike against PKK targets, but ended up killing a senior Iraqi military person. So Iraq's quite frankly not in a position to say much because their state's still fairly disabled. But they are none too happy with having their sovereignty intruded on by Turkey, and Turkey saying, we're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere because we feel like if Iraq gets more destabilized, it may lead to a separate Kurdistan, and we are not having it. Boom! There's some countries that are now pissed off at Turkey. I told you we'd get back within an hour. Did we make it within? We're over an hour. But we made it back to point of Turkey pissing off Iraq in a very big way. Turkey pissing off the United States with its movements against the Kurds in northern Iraq, which the United States has been supplying and funneling. And final news story, and this is from a few years ago, Turkish strikes target Kurdish allies of the United States in Iraq and Syria. Whoa. Hey, I thought we were in Iraq. What do you mean? Turkey targeting Kurds in Syria. What's that all about? And here's where sorry about that. And here's where we'll wrap up. Because in all of this mess, I've been talking about the Iraq invasion and the subsequent Iraq civil war and the rise of this group called ISIS, which caused international consternation across the entire region, and the rise of the chaos in Iraq, the rise of this crazy group called ISIS, and several other political events led to the Syrian civil war. So all of this mess is related. We're not going to talk about those nuances just yet, but look at this map. I see, and this is from 10 years ago. No, not even that, 5. The gray area in the middle controlled by the Islamic State, the insane clown posse. And then I see a whole area controlled in northern Iraq, controlled by Iraqi Kurds. But look at that other thing near the top. Little green splotches controlled by Syrian Kurds. And the other light green areas controlled by Syrian rebels. And then the red blotches controlled by the Syrian government. But let's focus on those Syrian Kurds. Because indeed, I've now pointed out that the Kurds, this is the Kurdish conundrum, my friends, that plays into the regional rivalry. There are Kurds across all of these states. The Iraqi Kurds have just been the most successful at rallying themselves and organizing themselves and possibly forming a state themselves. But there are Kurds in Iran, and there are Kurds in Azerbaijan, and there are Kurds in Syria. And the Syrian Kurds were looking at this chaos and civil war and the possible overthrow of the government of Syria as an opportune time to carve out more independence for themselves. And what have you learned in the last 5 minutes? Is Turkey going to sit still while Kurds carve out more independence for themselves? Hell no! They're not going to sit still for one hot Turkish second. So the Turks were then pulled into the Syrian civil war on 2 fronts. I already told you the Turks hate the Syrian leadership. They do not like the al-Assad leadership for various historical reasons, and they wanted to see them overthrown, so they were actually helping out the rebels to overthrow the Syrian government. This is Turkey. But let's just be honest. The real Turkish motivation here was to also put down any movement of the Kurds for greater nationalization or independence themselves. So there's 2 different operations that have occurred just in the last couple of years. One's Operation Olive Branch in March 2018 and Operation Peace Spring. Don't you love it how military people come up with missions of death called Peace Spring? And in both of these, I can summarize them quickly, the Turkish military is full-fledged involved in building an occupation zone about 20 miles wide on the Turkish-Syrian border, 20 miles into Syria. And they're doing this to make sure that those areas are not populated by radical Kurds and or the straight up the PKK. Again, I've told you the YPG is a Kurdish group that's been fighting, and there's a democratic something Kurdish group that's been fighting against Assad. They fought against Saddam Hussein, then they're fighting against the Assad regime in Syria. They might be looking for independence for themselves. They may be looking for a more democratic situation in that country, whichever. Turkey sees it as a threat to their existence. Turkey reads all Kurdish nationalism or Kurdish independence as a zone of PKK people that are going to then encourage the Kurds in Turkey to attack the Turkish government, or encourage the Kurds in Turkey into doing the same thing and fighting for independence within the sovereign state of Turkey. That's their primary motivation, and you should not forget it. And the incursions into northeast Syria, which is now a full-fledged zone, there are lots of Kurds in Syria, and they control a fairly hefty area right this second, by the way. That may change because the al-Assad leadership is winning the civil war with help from the Russians and others. But Assad's Syria is going to hold together, at least for the foreseeable future. The Kurds do control swaths of the country. However, Turkey outright now controls the whole border region within Syria. And why? Specifically to counter any Kurdish movements that will then, they believe, blow back on them with negative repercussions. Does that make sense? A lot of folks have been saying, too, hey, the Turks at one point were fighting and killing Kurdish soldiers who were fighting against ISIS. And this also pissed off the United States because the United States was also funneling money and guns to the Syrian Kurds because they're a bunch of badasses. And they were the ones who were doing most of the heavy lifting to defeat ISIS. So everybody hated this ISIS group, and everybody agreed that they hated this ISIS group, and everybody wanted to kill this group called ISIS. But Turkey was actually killing some of the people that were killing ISIS because their primary objective, again, is to not have Kurdish independence in any of these places. And I'm bringing this picture back. Does any of this make more sense now? So you have that group called the Kurds that were fighting against ISIS, and the Arab team was fighting against ISIS, and the Assad team was fighting against ISIS. But Turkey was also trying to blow up some of the Kurds because of their own reasons. Does that make sense? Okay, good. U.S. aid to Syrian militant strains Turkish ties. This has been going on for several years now. Again, the United States is plenty ticked at Turkey because as the United States has been following its objectives to, one, overthrow Saddam Hussein, stop terrorism in Iraq, stop terrorism in Syria, overthrow the Assad regime, fight against ISIS. All these things is what the United States wanted to do. And it was funneling money and guns to Kurds in both places to do those things. At the same time, Turkey was blowing up those people. Even though the United States and Turkey are allies. So now we come up full scale to stories of the last 48 hours. Turkey's new military deployment in Idlib puts spotlight on Syria. Now they're starting to piss off the Russians because the Turks are now moving massive armaments over into the last kind of rebel stronghold in Syria there's not even Kurds there. So now we have a face-off and a possible friction that's ramping up between Russia and Russia and Turkey. And for those of you that tuned into my podcast about Azerbaijan and Armenia last week, you know that's another source of friction between Russia and Turkey. So now you've got two countries, Russia and Turkey, that are fighting almost against each other in two different places, neither of which belongs to them. So we're going to keep an eye on that. And also from just the last couple weeks, from October 1, actually, exactly 13 days ago, the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, submitted a motion to basically his Congress to expand border operations in Iraq and in Syria for a whole nother year. So it was a parliamentary motion where they said, hey, look, we already occupy these areas fighting against Kurdish radicals and the PKK and perhaps the Syrian government. And we are giving ourselves permission to continue those operations. Cool? And that's ticking off Syria. That's ticking off perhaps the United States. It possibly is now ticking off Russia. And I'm putting up my hatred guide because Team 5, the Kurds, which we're now throwing in there, they just hate dying. But they are well hated by the Turks. So, yesterday we talked about Greece, Cyprus, the UAE, Armenia having historical issues with Turkey that are pissing them off right now. And today's talk about regional rivalries and the Kurdish conundrum, we can add the Turkish Kurds have problems with the Turks, the Iraqi Kurds the Syrian Kurds, Kurds in general, the Syrian leadership. Iraq is pissed off at Turkey. Russia's getting pissed off at Turkey. And even the United States is getting pissed off at Turkey, specifically when it comes to the Syrian situation and even the Iraqi situation, where the United States is trying to get the Kurds to help out and do stuff, and Turkey is working against those objectives of the United States. Okay, we can end there. Where would you like to go next? Should we now visit Azerbaijan, where a lot of Turkish fighters are moving to from Syria to fight on another front? Or should we talk about something else? There is plenty other folks pissed at Turkey right now, so I will pick another topic tomorrow and give you another one. And I swear I'll hold it to a half hour. This was all the big stuff. I've done the heavy lifting now. Anything else we do for the next couple days, it'll be a little bit lighter. I say that, famous last words, but it'll be a little bit lighter. So having said that, are there any questions anyone has about anything I've talked about so far about Turkey taking off the world? And as I get to those questions, I do want to once again reaffirm to my Turkish friends, I'm not personally pissed off at Turkey. And I'm not trying to make a political point or even a political propaganda point. I just look at what's happening, and Turkey is definitely going down a new road right now. And so I like to point that out to students of the world of, hey, here's what's going on. Turkey has every right as a sovereign state and a sovereign state with a decent military. I call Turkey a middle power. It's a regional power. And it has every right to follow its own objectives and try to work on things that make itself feel more secure and or to get its fair shake in the world. So I'm not saying they're wrong to do any of these things. I'm just saying things are stacking up. Things are stacking up and pissing off lots of folks. And what's going on with all this? Okay, to the questions. Matt Growl says, thank you, Professor Gore, for the hate guide. Small Booty says, hey there, thank you for the show. Minor correction for Turkish president's name. It is pronounced like Recep. Did I not pronounce that? I always try to. I actually heard it both ways, Small Booty, and I've heard it both ways from Turks, actually, because I've been corrected multiple times. And I thought it's Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Most people correct me on the Erdogan, not Erdogan. But I have heard Recep and Recep. I've heard it both ways. So I'm good either way. I'm willing to say it any way anybody likes it. And Bijan9776 says, how does Iran feel about Turkey right now? Yeah, I only touched upon the Iranian situation when talking about regional rivalries. And I'm actually thinking that maybe Iran could be a topic for tomorrow or the next day. I'll have to do a little bit more research. But again, on again, off again, Iran and Turkey kind of get along okay. But they're in an off period right now because Iran, as a Shia leader, has been propping up al-Assad, a Shia person in charge of Syria. And you have to assume that all of Turkey's moves to help overthrow Assad are not making Iran very happy. And then we can play it forward to what I'll probably talk about tomorrow. We'll probably revisit the Nagorno-Karabakh fight between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is also infuriating Iran for reasons I'm not sure I understand. Because Turkey is supporting its Turkic brothers in arms in Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan is mostly Shias too. So I'm actually not even sure exactly why Iran has a problem with Turkey intervening there, but I've heard they do. So I wouldn't say it's a very antagonistic relationship between Iran and Turkey right this second, but it could get there. It looks like it's heading there. Again, and that's mostly why I'm curious about talking about Turkey ticking off the world, because Turkey routinely has had a lot of allies, and they seem to really just be going it alone right now and not even caring. It's the not caring part that intrigues me. So if you're Turkish and you really love Recep, thank you, Small Booty. If you really love Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and you think that I'm against him, I'm just an observer. I believe that it's partly the moves that Turkey is making abroad, Turkey now has more troop movement and is involved in more international conflict than it has been, I think, ever. I do not believe Turkey has had this many troops in this many places since the birth of the country in 1923. So that alone is pause for thought. Like, okay, what's going on there? But I think you couple that with Recep Erdogan's moves to become a dictator. And even if you are a Turk who loves Recep, you just got to call a spade a spade. He's kind of a one-party state leader. He's borderline dictator. He holds all the power and he holds all the cards. So that's also new for Turkey's trajectory. They have not been that way since 1923. So it's a combination of a very strong leader who's absorbed all power to himself at the same time that Turkey's doing a whole bunch of international action that intrigues me of like, that's unique, that's new, and that's probably why that he's ticking off so many people. In fact, another Turkish person hit me up yesterday and said something to the effect of, at the end of the podcast yesterday, I said, well, tomorrow we'll talk about Turkey's Erdogan and Erdogan's Turkey. And I probably should have titled the podcast that. It's not that Turkey's ticking everyone off. It really is Erdogan's Turkey that's ticking everybody off. So you get what I'm saying there? Turkey's Erdogan, he's the leader, and it's Erdogan's Turkey. He has taken the country in an entirely different path for the better part of 20 years, and it's manifesting itself in all these conflicts. Anyway, I don't have any other questions in front of me that I can see, unless it's frozen. Daniel Schallhofer. I love it.
What's your opinion on the handling of the murder of Jamal
The Khashoggi murder in Saudi Arabia. Or no, it was in Turkey.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Good one, Daniel. So back to regional rivalries. That's why I have to do these things. I know I'm long-winded. I know everybody hates long podcasts. The whole world wants sound bites. I know, but I'm old and I can't do it because I want you to understand all these things. And when you understand regional rivalries, you can start looking at news stories and you're like, oh, that supports that. And oh, this supports that. Oh, and this is why that happened. So thank you, Daniel. I totally forgot part of the regional rivalry that Turkey was plenty ticked off at Saudi Arabia for orchestrating the assassination of a reporter on Turkish soil. They still haven't forgiven that. And in that light, Turkey, Erdogan's Turkey, is very similar to Iran in that Turkey has been, antagonistic is not the right word. Turkey makes no bones about it that they believe the Arab world is behind the times. And Erdogan's Turkey sees themselves as a much better example of leadership than virtually all the other Arab states. Now, again, they've never said that out loud, but I read a lot and I watch a lot and I think a lot, and this goes part and parcel for Turkey's attitude. And maybe this is what we'll talk about tomorrow too, by the way. We could talk about Turkey's leadership role in the region and how it pisses everybody off, because I'll give you a little taste of it right now. Recep, thank you, Small Beauty. Recep is one of the biggest, staunchest defenders of the Palestinian cause. And Recep has already come out against the other Arab states who have recognized Israel, and Recep is looked upon by many Palestinians and other people across the Arab world as a really powerful, successful leader who stands up for, I don't know, Islamic people or even Arab people or proper causes. He is somewhat of a celebrity even outside of Turkey. And that causes consternation between Turkey and other Arab states. So Iran outright says, oh, the Arab states all suck. They're all monarchies and they're crooks. Recep is a little more diplomatic, but says, yes, the Arab states don't do enough for the Palestinian situation. They let Israel get away with way too much. Recep is one of the few leaders, while all the other Arab states are suddenly lining up to recognize Israel. Recep Erdogan has been actually more vocal against Israel, not in terms of destroying them. That's what Iran typically says. But Recep has been very vocal about how Israel is getting away with too much, and there's too much bad stuff happening with the Palestinians there. And it also plays into the territorial fight over the Eastern Mediterranean Sea that's going down. So don't think any of these things I'm talking about are isolated. They're all related. So Recep wants to be a powerful player and exude Turkish power for political reasons, for security reasons when it comes to the Kurds, and for territorial reasons. They want to be seen as a strong military and a powerful, outspoken critic of whoever, because they want to take over parts of the Eastern Mediterranean. And it could be parts of the Eastern Mediterranean that Israel might have claim over. So all of these things are related. And again, this is what's ramping up the rhetoric against Turkey and Turkey's rhetoric about everybody else. Other questions? That was a good question. I forgot about the journalist getting assassinated. Yeah, Turkey was none too happy about that.
Comment on YouTube was saying, don't keep them short. This is from Bass Cats. It's great stuff. If you keep up this kind of content, your channel will blow up in a good way. No one who likes good podcasts hates long podcasts.
Oh, good. So someone from YouTube says, no one who likes good podcasts hates long podcasts. Good to know, because man, am I long-winded. Here's the thing. I'm used to lecturing for hours. So even lecturing for an hour is like, to me, I'm just getting warmed up. We're like, oh, I was going to try to end in 30 minutes. Oh, well, we'll try again tomorrow to end in 30 minutes. No, I do like this format, and I have hesitated to do podcast. I have hesitated to try to become an online personality simply because I've always been much better live. And being live affords you more opportunity to take the conversation where you want it to go, but also include people in a conversation who are right in front of you. And you're not limited by time. And so I get it. The world is a soundbite world. We probably will never blow up. Thank you, the viewer on YouTube who said that. However, we live in a Kim Kardashian world. I'm not taking selfies of myself, so I don't know that we'll ever become that popular, but I would much rather concentrate on good content and stuff that people want to hear about, as opposed to, hey, look at me do some silly ass shit and click on me and like me and follow me. I'm too damn old. I'm just going to talk about stuff that I think is important for understanding the world. I'm just trying to win a Nobel Peace Prize. If I can spread enough education across the planet to help people understand why other countries and other peoples do the things they do, then I should get a damn Nobel Peace Prize. Every damn American president seems to get one. They don't do nothing. Okay. Let's see. Constant Questioning says, yeah, long form is great. Thank you, Constant. And Bijan9776 says, I love your videos. I missed them for the last year. And Small Booty says, with this online format, you can reach out to more people. I certainly am enjoying your podcast lecture. Thank you, Booty. Love your screen name, Booty.
It's an O, not an A.
I know it's, how do you...
I think it's small. I don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah, I know it's an O. I know it's small, Booty, but what the hell is small?
I don't know.
I'm just saying, I'm saying small booty, but it's small booty with a southern accent. Small booty, southern accent. I don't even know what size your booty is, small booty. It's fine with me, no matter what it is. Sorry, is that sexist? Can you be sexist when you don't know who's on the other side of the line? Anyway, unless there's other questions, I have wildly enjoyed another 90 minutes podcasting. This is great fun. Again, I will try to keep it a little bit shorter tomorrow because I've now done a lot of the heavy lifting. The other things I was going to talk about, again, Turkey pissing off other entities. I kind of want to get back to the Mediterranean. I did want to talk about Turkish-Israeli relations just a bit because things are changing fast with Arab countries recognize them. I did want to revisit the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in Azerbaijan, because that is Turkey is pissing off some people with what they're doing there. But neither of those should take too long. So I'll pick one or the other and do that tomorrow. And we'll take it from there and see who else we can talk about who's angry. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great evening. And as always, party on. And we'll see you again tomorrow for another podcast on this very station. Yes, yes.